The title of the sermon for the Sabbath today is Don't Pull an Uzzah. Don't pull an Uzzah. And that'll become more apparent as we go on. The Ark of the Covenant was a fancy box. It was a sacred chest that was built by the Israelites. They built it as God described under the direction of Moses. But it's a box or a chest, if you will, that held a very significant place, a very significant role in biblical history. There are individuals and groups today, even to this very day, that tell us where it is, and they have their various, I guess some would say conspiracies, others would say they're not, as to the location of that ark. The Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark. It was symbolic, highly symbolic, and it symbolized God's presence among the people at that time, and truly served as a focal point for the worship, for their worship, and for divine guidance. It was very symbolic of that, and it did symbolize that. Now, the journey of the ark is also a very interesting narrative as we go through the scriptures. It spans several books in the Old Testament. And as you read through the stories, we won't go through it all today. We'll just touch on a few things, but it illustrates, again, God's faithfulness and the whole entire relationship between the nation of Israel and God. Let's look a little bit, just for reminder's sake, in Exodus chapter 25, about the construction and some of the initial placement of it, a little bit of the details in Exodus chapter 25. And it gives us a number of details about it. You can start all the way in verse 1. I'm going to drop down a little bit, but do recommend to go back and remind yourself of these things in your own studies. And I'll start in verse 10. And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. So we can see some of the dimensions here. You shall overlap it with pure gold inside and out. You shall overlay it, and you shall make on it a molding of gold all around. And then in verse 12, you shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them in the 4 corners. And so we can kind of visualize these rings. 2 rings shall be on one side, 2 rings on the other side, on the upper corners of it. And you shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. And you shall put the poles into the rings on the side of the ark. Well, why would you do that? And keep reading. It just says that the ark may be carried by them. The poles shall be in the rings of the ark. They shall not be taken from it. So you put them in there, you leave them there. And you shall put into the ark the testimony which I give you, God's commandments. And you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, a hammered work you shall make them at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, the other cherub at the other end, and you shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it of one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, like covering the very throne of God, and they shall face one another. The face of the cherubim shall be toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I give you. And there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I shall give you in commandment to the children of Israel. So again, we can read more of it. It goes on, and there's some before, but it gives the sense of some of the construction, placement of the ark as they were given by God, again through the direction of Moses. But the ark was, again, as I mentioned earlier, highly symbolic, and it did serve as a great symbol of divine presence and holiness. You can see God's connection with this ark, and it was it would be this symbol that God was with them, and it was a place of meeting. Its design, its purpose, were marked by the very holiness of God. In every place the ark rested, it reminded the Israelites of something. It would be, and quite often as people, we do need to be reminded. We do need to see, and it was a reminder to them that the Lord dwelt among them, and he said he would. Now that's different than today, where we're told he will dwell in us, of course, through the power of his Holy Spirit. But at this time, he did dwell among them, and this ark was highly symbolic of that. But yet innately, and very much so, set apart in majesty. The ark's presence signified God's guidance, as an example, as seen through how that led them through the desert. We could take a look at that example. Let's notice Numbers chapter 10. Numbers chapter 10. And again, we'll break into the thought. Numbers chapter 10. And let's look here a little bit at this journey. Let's drop down to verse 33. I'll read to the end of the chapter. So they departed from the mountain of the Lord on a journey of 3 days. And notice this, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them for the 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. In verse 34, and the cloud of the Lord was above them day by day when they went out from the camp. So it was whenever the ark set out that Moses said, Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and that those who hate you flee before you. And when it rested, he said, Return, O Lord, to the many thousands of Israel. And so again, we see this example here of the ark's significance in even this journey through the desert. And it shows how it played a very crucial role. This symbolic, fancy chest, if you will, played a crucial role, not only in their journeys here, but we won't turn to all these scriptures. I'll just reference them, but we even see it when they crossed over the Jordan River, into the promised land. And you remember, if you can recall, some of the story as the priests were carrying the ark, and then they stepped into the river. And remember what happened? The waters parted even at that time, and the people walked across the river on dry ground. You can find that in Joshua chapter 3, about verses 14 through 17 there. Again, this miraculous event was reaffirming to the people, reaffirming to all, that God promised to deliver them. God promised them, the land of Canaan through, of course, their ancestor Abraham. There's another kind of interesting story. They cross over, and of course, remember the whole story about the conquest of Jericho. We find that in Joshua chapter 6. And again, how did that all play out? Well, we find the ark. Remember, the ark was carried around the city for 7 days, and then culminating in the walls when they came tumbling down. They collapsed on the 7th day after the priests blew their trumpets and the people shouted. Again, you can read about that example in Joshua chapter 6. But again, you can see the ark and the significance of the ark in even that story. And so the presence of this ark, it was a testament, if you will, to to God's power. God showed immense power, and through these circumstances, I mean, I've crossed many rivers. I've not had the ark, and I've never had the waters parted, and they did. They saw it, they witnessed it, they lived it. They had, again, fulfilled promises that took place in their lives and right before them. Now, after the conquest, we find that the ark was placed in Shiloh, and it remained there for many, many years. Joshua chapter 18 talks about that. And again, I'm just giving some reference scriptures to help save on some time here today. The point I'm trying to make is we do see the significance and the symbolism and the significance of the ark playing out throughout Israel as a nation and throughout their journeys. Let's notice 1 Samuel chapter 4. And it's a pretty interesting story here. I don't want to say comical, I suppose, because if you're a Philistine, it was definitely not comical. But notice here 1 Samuel chapter 4. We'll start right in verse 1. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing all these names right, so please bear with me. Then the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel. And when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men of the army of the field. So it's pretty sound defeat. And when the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines?" So they're trying to reason through what in the world just happened and what went on and why. And let us bring up, notice this, the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies. So now they're looking to the ark in a sense to save them instead of the symbolism of what it was meant to be, which was God. And so the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted loudly, apparently so loud that the earth shook. Now when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "Well, what does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid. I suppose, they would have known the stories, and word travels, and, God has come into the camp. And they said, "Woe to us, for such a thing has never happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of the mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines, that you do not become servants of the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Conduct yourselves like men and fight." And so the Philistines fought. And notice this. And Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel. Oh, we thought 4,000 was a lot. 30,000 foot soldiers. 30,000. And verse 11, also the ark of God was captured. Yeah, they got it. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So again, when we look at the story and all the way back to Exodus 25, and we walk through all these journeys and the significance and everything. So here there's this battle with the Philistines. The Israelites think they got it made because, well, we got the box. bring the ark to the battlefield, and contrary to their expectations, the Philistines won, and the ark was captured. Now, do you think Israel was a little bit distressed at that time? Considering everything that the ark represented and what it meant to them, would have been great distress. Great distress. I suppose if you were a Philistine at that time, you just thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. We got the ark. They recognized that. But then we won't go through it, I guess, but you can go through 1 Samuel chapter 5 and chapter 6, because what they initially thought was this great booty of war, they find that it didn't work out so well for them, those Philistines. And it ends up bringing a lot of plagues. It ends up bringing a lot of problems. Everywhere they go with this thing, they move from city to city, and but every time each location suffered until they came to a very significant decision. They said, "We need to give this thing back. This isn't working out too good. We need to give it back." And so they decided to return it to Israel. And again, you go through chapter 5 and chapter 6 here in 1 Samuel. Let's jump ahead to 1 Samuel chapter 7, and we'll read about this, verses 1 and 2. 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Then the men of Kirjath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord, and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. And so it was that the ark remained in Kirjath Jearim a long time. It was there 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. And so it was returned. The Philistines recognized that this was a bad deal. They give it back to Israel. They return it to them. And for 20 years, give or take, we find that it's in the house of Abinadab, where it stayed and where it remained for, 2 decades. And Israel, as we're told here, lamented after the Lord. Because through that trial, I suppose, and that test, they, at least at that time, they lamented, so they came to a realization of how much they truly needed God's presence and God's guidance. So it's a little bit of backdrop. We kind of went through some of that quickly, and again, I recommend go back and read some of these stories. But just some of the backdrop as we now go to 2 Samuel chapter 6. Again, that's some of the backdrop as we make our way to 2 Samuel chapter 6. And here we find King David. And it was King David's desire to bring the ark and everything the ark represented, everything the ark symbolized, all the promises of God, the power of God, the deliverance of God. He wanted to bring that ark to Jerusalem. Well, why Jerusalem? Well, the city of Jerusalem was being established for the nation as the center city, if you will, of not only the politics of the city, but the central place of worship, and it was the center for the nation. And he wants to bring the ark back. Anything bad about that? I mean, that's it's great. Great plan, great idea. And here's where the part in the story where we come to the individual whose name was in today's title. His name was Uzzah. Now we come to this man named Uzzah, and we find here this situation in 2 Samuel chapter 6. David wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem. Notice verse 1. Again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. So a lot of fanfare, a huge event, a lot of eyes on this, a lot of attention being placed here. And David arose and he went with all the people who were with him from Baale, Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart. You know, you're not going to take something that highly symbolic and something that important, right? And you're not going to stick it on some old rickety, used, dilapidated piece of junk. You're going to find a new cart, right? You're going to go get the the Lincoln. You're going to get the Lexus. You're going to go get the BMW or whatever it is. You're not going to use some dilapidated old piece of junk. In other words, only the best for this tremendous occasion. They put it on a new cart and they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. So lots of fanfare. Okay, this huge event. And these two individuals, these brothers, were chosen to be on this cart. Now, again, I think we put ourselves in the story a little bit. Here is this scenario, this situation. Here's the story. I would imagine there would have been a tremendous, I don't want to say pride because I don't mean it in the bad way, but I mean, there must have been very pleased to be able to do that out of all the people. They had that awesome opportunity to drive this brand new cart with the ark on it. And they brought it out of the house of Nimnah, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. And then David and all the house of Israel played music. So it was lots of fanfare, it was festivity before the Lord on all kinds of instruments of fir wood and harps and stringed instruments, tambourines and sistrums and on cymbals. And when they came to Nashon's threshing floor, so apparently it's probably like all was going well, things were working out great. They come to Nashon's threshing floor, and Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God, and he took hold of it, for the ox stumbled. So I can see the ox kind of trumping along, and one kind of stumbles a little bit, and I don't know if the cart must have tipped a little bit or something happened. And I mean, here's this guy who got chosen, him and his brother, out of everybody, thousands and thousands of people watching this thing, eyes on him. The king's there, music's playing, and he's watching this thing about to tumble over. So he reaches out to stop it. I mean, it seems reasonable, on the surface. I think it seems reasonable. Excuse me. Then, what happens though? Well, God gets ticked off. God did not appreciate Uzzah touching that ark. And so the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error. And he died there by the ark of God. Wow. And David became angry. I guess, a little bit of his human nature kicked in, and he probably felt bad, and he probably thought, man, I had this guy do this, So he gets angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. And he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. I don't know. I mean, again, I say this from time to time when you try and put yourself into the story. I mean, here's Ahihu, and here's him and his brother, and they've just got this tremendous opportunity, and he looks back, and all of a sudden his brother's laying there dead. I would imagine he was probably stunned himself. In one moment, there they were driving the cart along, and he's out and he's leading, and there's all kinds of the music and fanfare and the people, and then there they come to Nashon's threshing floor, and in the next moment, his brother's gone, lying dead on the ground. And why? Why? Why did that happen? Again, the oxen stumbled. The cart obviously shook enough that it must have appeared that the ark was going to maybe topple over, fall. I mean, could you imagine if you're the guy there and you just stand there and the ark's about to tip off the cart and you just watch it go and hit the ground, in front of everybody? So what did Uzzah do? Well, he had an impulse, and I mean, if I put myself there, I would hope in a sense, would do the same if I knew better. I guess maybe not, but I would want it. I would want to steady it. I wouldn't want it to fall and hit the ground. This symbol, this massive symbol for the whole nation. So he reaches out his hand, grabs the ark, which was carried on this cart. It seems reasonable to me, as in from a human level, that you would do that. But yet we find that God struck Uzzah down. Struck him down for touching it. Why this incident? Because in a sense, I mean, we can kind of feel bad for Uzzah. Like, why in the world would God do that to him? He was just trying to help. Why did God deal with this individual with a seemingly well-intentioned action? I don't want the ark to fall off the cart. Why such a seemingly harsh response? Why did God take his life for trying to steady the ark and not let it fall over and hit the ground? So I hope as we examine this episode, this scenario, we can perhaps draw some valuable insight to how God views our lives right here, right now, today, and how he views our lives and our future opportunities. So will we gain these insights? Can we gain these insights? Or will we pull an Uzzah? Or will we pull an Uzzah? Notice Exodus 25 again, if you would. Exodus chapter 25 and verses 14 and 15. Why were the rings there? Why were the rings built into the ark? You should put poles into the rings of the sides of the ark, that the ark may be carried by them. It's interesting. Remember, this is Exodus 25 we're reading here, and this is all the way back to the construction of it and the directions of it. And what were the very original directions? The poles, verse 15, shall be in the rings of the ark. They shall not be taken from it. And so we step back and say, okay, that's what was instructed. Why then, when we go to 2 Samuel 6, was it sitting on a cart? So there's a problem here. So notice Numbers chapter 4. We'll notice a few scriptures here in the book of Numbers. Let's first look at Numbers chapter 4. Verse 15. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is set to go, when the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. These are the things in the tabernacle of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. So the rings were put in the ark, the poles were put through the rings, and it was meant to carry the ark because God said, don't touch it. Don't touch it. Carry him with the poles. And who was to carry it? Anybody? No, we find it was Kohath. Kohath clan. Notice Numbers chapter 7. Numbers chapter 7, starting at verse 1. Now it came to pass when Moses had finished setting up the tabernacle that he anointed it and consecrated it and all its furnishings and the altar and all its utensils. So he anointed them and consecrated them. In other words, they were set apart for holy use. Then the leaders of Israel, the heads of their fathers' houses, who were the leaders of the tribes and over those who were numbered, made an offering. And they brought their offering before the Lord, 6 covered carts, 12 oxen, a cart, every 2 of the leaders, for each one an ox, and they presented them before the tabernacle. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, accept these from them, that they may be used in doing the work of the tabernacle of meeting, and you shall give them to the Levites, to every man according to his service. So Moses took the carts, the oxen, gave them to the Levites. 2 carts, 4 oxen. He gave them to the sons of Gershon according to their service, and 4 carts and 8 oxen he gave to the sons of Marah according to their service under the authority of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. But to the sons of Kohath he gave none, because theirs was the service of the holy things, which they carried on their shoulders. This group of individuals, this clan, if you will, the Kohathian clan, the Kohathites, were among the Levites, and they were specifically charged with the carrying of holy items on their shoulders, not in a cart with oxen, on their shoulders. They weren't allowed to touch the stuff. Their job was to carry it. And it was forbidden for them, as we already told, to touch it, and if upon pain of death. Now, these were guidelines, instructions, and they underscored God's holiness. And so it's important that we understand that and what it symbolized and what it meant and why God said what he said and did what he did, and why these instructions were so important and so poignant, so specific. It was teaching that, no sinful human being was going to handle anything in his presence, and you weren't going to approach it casually. You weren't going to do it your way, and you weren't going to, tweak and change it and add to it, or no, you were going to do it God's way, and it was a very specific way, and it was all consecrated, set apart, and it was holy. God is holy. Now, the Israelites back then took this very seriously. There's even stories in there where they were so serious about it that they made boundaries, because they wanted a big buffer zone just in case. They didn't want to they didn't want to get as close to the line as possible, and lean over to look at it. No, I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand about a half mile back. Thank you very much. And then there was this buffer zone. So they took it very seriously. And any violation of those sacred boundaries, if you will, was considered was the danger zone, because it meant being irreverent. It meant being disrespectful. It meant approaching in a lackadaisical, mundane way. And that approach was not acceptable with this direct symbol of God's holiness. Now, years later, the men of Israel had actually ignored explicit instructions from God concerning the transportation of the ark. God commanded that only the priests, the sons of Levi, were to bear the ark of the covenant on their shoulders. You can also reference Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 8. God said that it was them and them alone that was to carry it, and they were to carry it on their shoulders. Don't touch it. You put the poles in, you leave the poles in, you carry the poles on your shoulders. Nobody other than Aaron and his sons were to touch any holy articles at all, including the ark. And again, the penalty was stiff. It was a life and death scenario. We already read the instructions. Exodus 25, God equipped the ark with 4 rings, one on each corner. The poles or the staves would go through those rings so they could lift it up and carry it on their shoulders by those poles. So, that in mind, when we go to the story of Uzzah in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we run into a couple of scenarios then, don't we? Well, number one, Uzzah was not of the Levitical priesthood. Number one, he wasn't specifically from the clan that God had determined would be the ones to carry it. His genealogy shows he was there was a little nepotism involved. He was David's nephew. He was that, but he was not from the Levitical priesthood. He was, as we were told already, he was the son of Abinadab, David's brother. 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 13. Secondly, we find that instead of the ark being carried, it was put on a cart. David put it on a cart. 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 7. So Uzzah was now put into this situation, and he had an impulse when he sees it toppling over. But the impulse, the action, showcased a fundamental misunderstanding of God's holiness and the reverence required when we come before God and things to do with God. Showed a misunderstanding of it all. Now, it was a simple reflex, right? I mean, again, probably most any of us, if we were in his sandals, probably done the same thing. I'm not going to let this thing fall and hit the ground. I know what this thing means. I'm not going to do it. Now, I guess we could say he should have never been in that scenario in the first place, but he was. And so he has this impulsive reflex, and it was well-meaning, sincere, but it went directly against what God said to do. It was completely against God's very clear directive from the very beginning, where we read about the construction and the directions of it. Everybody should have known. The king should have known, right? I mean, he's supposed to go through and write his own copies of things. He should have known. It was a breach that highlights the seriousness which God views his orders and instructions. I hope we understand that point. I think it can be easy to maybe slough these things off and say, oh, that's just way back there, Old Testament stuff, that's just Israel. No. This is God who gave very distinct instructions. No muss, no fuss. There was no indiscrepancies and, well, maybe he could have been more clear here. No, it was very clear, very distinct, God's clear directives. And it was a breach of the seriousness of how God views this. And for whatever reason, even King David, who was accompanying the ark and threw the party, if you want to say that, for whatever reason, he forgot these conditions. And apparently decided to, I guess, do what was right in his own eyes versus consulting God on this matter. You know, something went wrong. Something went wrong. And because of the scenario and the situation, there was a very abrupt judgment upon Uzzah, which should serve as a vivid reminder of how God's holiness, the things of God, God's instructions, God's ways are to be treated. And it illustrates that they are to be treated with the utmost respect by everybody. Now, it was a teaching moment for David as well, because you got to remember all the people watching. A lot of people would have seen this, including King David and all the Israelites that were there. They would have seen this. So it was a teaching moment. You do not take this mundanely. You do not treat this disrespectfully. Now, we're told, remember when we read, after Uzzah died, David was angry. He was angry. But that anger transitioned to fear, transitioned to awe and respect and repentance, which was the proper response. And we can notice 1 Chronicles chapter 15. And we'll start 1 Chronicles 15 right from the verse 1. David built houses for himself. Verse 1, in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, no one may carry the ark of God but the Levites, for the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of God and to minister before him forever. Okay, that's good. And David gathered all Israel together at Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the Lord to its place, which he had prepared for it. Then David assembled the children of Aaron and the Levites. Of the sons of Kohath, Uriel the chief, and 120 of his brethren. Of the sons of Merari, Asaiah the chief, and 220 of his brethren. Of the sons of Gershon, Joel the chief, and 130 of his brethren. Of the sons of Elizaphan, Shemaiah the chief, and 200 of his brethren. The sons of Hebron, Eliel the chief, and 80 of his brethren. And the sons of Uzziel, Amminadab's the chief, and 112 of his brethren. And David called for Zadok and Abiathar the priests, and for the Levites, Shimei and Eliel and Abinadab, and he said to them, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Sanctify yourselves, you and your brethren, that you may bring up the ark of the Lord, God of Israel, to the place I have prepared for it. For because you did not do it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, because we did not consult him about the proper order. And so the priests and the Levites sanctify themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel. And the children of the Levites bore the ark of God, on their shoulders by its poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. So basically what they should have done in the first place. So they learned the lesson. It was a hard lesson. They learned it. This incident was not just about, punishing Uzzah's individual act of touching the ark. It wasn't just about that. It underscored the disobedience, tossing aside, ignoring God's instructions, especially concerning his holiness, had an immediate and, in that case, if you're Uzzah, a severe consequence. Now, is it always immediate? No. And sometimes when it's not immediate, and we think things just go on and on and on, and we think, I got away with it. Sometimes we think that. But it taught the leaders and the nation that their reverence, their respect, and their outlook had to be matched by obedience to God's instructions. It had to be matched by obedience. Not just good intentions, because as you look at the story, the intentions were good. There was nothing wrong with the intentions. That ark was highly symbolic. It meant a lot to the nation. They wanted to put it in Jerusalem, and it was the center. Uzzah's sincerity was, I think, good sincerity, and him and his brother, they were traveling the ark there. But good intentions and have to also come along with obedience to God. That's why we're even told in the New Testament, right? How do we worship God? In sincerity and truth, not or. In sincerity and truth. So on the surface, it would appear that Uzzah was, merely the unwitting victim of unfortunate circumstances. I mean, on the surface, it would appear that way. But they should have known better. They all should have. They all should have. And I think it is important for us to ask, what does this mean for us today? And what can and should we learn from this story as an example? Because these stories are here. Why are these stories here? It's not for Uzzah. He's gone. As it says in Corinthians, right? They're for our example, our learning, for our admonition. They're for us. We can learn from this incident. And I think it's, and anytime someone says, I think, you can take it with a grain of salt, I know, but it would seem obvious that God does not want us compromising, even if we're sincere about it. God does not want us compromising with his instructions, with his commands. I think I could say with his truths, his doctrines. I think we could say that. I think he wants us compromising with his government. In this case, God acted to halt. It was a quick, seemingly harsh punishment, right? I mean, it was just boom, it was done. Why? So, as we look at the story, brethren, you see when it can be something seemingly small, but what does it take to start a trend? I mean, today, just, one crazy kid goes on the internet and does something crazy, and all of a sudden it's a trend, and we're getting letters from the school saying, "Hey, make sure your kid's not doing such and such." It's like, what? Where did this come from? It's quick. You see, it's a trend. God didn't want the trend. He didn't want that trend of disobedience and irreverence and disrespect as they ignored his instructions and his laws. And it starts small, but then it's the next thing, and then it's the next thing, and then it's the next thing, and all of a sudden, like a domino effect, everything gets cast aside. It's like a domino effect. I use the example sometimes of, things have fingers. And so you monkey around with this little point, but it's got a finger, and all of a sudden it affects the next thing, and then the next thing, and it spreads like wildfire. When you have a little spark, you can put a spark out pretty easy. You just lick your fingers and snuff it out. But if you let it go and it turns into a forest fire, now it's not so easy anymore. And God recognized and understood that. Notice Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8. Well-known verse, 18. Well-known verse, Romans 8:18. For Paul writing says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." So even in our lives, God on occasion will allow us to suffer to one degree or another, so that spiritual lessons can be brought home, if you will. And sometimes, depending on the person, it takes a 2x4. And sometimes, depending on the person, it takes a 4x4. Whatever it might be. We're all a little bit different that way. But you see, our everlasting life is of primary importance to God. We're here, and we're only here because God desires that we be in their family. And for us to learn important spiritual lessons, sometimes trials may be necessary, and some more severe than others. God called us, and He is constantly aware of our circumstances. He promises, now He makes the promise, right? 1 Corinthians 10, "I won't give you more than you can handle." Now, we may not always agree with that assessment, but He gives us that promise, and we have that reassurance. But it behooves us, brethren, it behooves us to be constantly and carefully examining our lives, not just at Passover, not just when something really bad happens. Like, it just should be a way and a part of our lives to be looking at ourselves and to make sure, it behooves us to make sure, am I in line with God? Am I lined up with God? Now, of course, we're never going to be perfect in the flesh, ever. But are we in line with God's laws, with God's ways, with God's instructions, with God's truth, with God's doctrine, with God's way of life? And sometimes we can have hiccups, but we get back. We get back and we keep going, following God's laws and God's lifestyle. Again, God's teachings. And for those now in this church age, for us in this church age, and when we're talking about truths and we're talking about traditions, where we're talking about doctrines, those come from God the Father, who relays it to Jesus Christ, who then gives it to the apostles to teach the rest of us. And we We can't miss these points. We just can't miss them. And you look at the trend that's going on right now, and I just I have to wonder and hesitate. And well, what's next? Is this just the Great Tribulation? Is that what's next? Is that what it's going to take? And we have all these splits and all these divisions and all this confusion and all the arguing and all this stuff in this confused church age that we're currently living in. It's far better for us to learn it now than to wait to the Great Tribulation. It's far better under these circumstances to learn the lessons now. And we won't learn anything if we do. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know why David missed it. I don't know why Uzzah missed it. I don't know why why did they miss it? Because they had the scrolls, right? All they had to do is go back and read. Oh yeah, we can't use a cart. We're supposed to use the poles, and the Levites carried on their shoulders. That's all they had to do, and that whole incident wouldn't have happened. And so, I kind of look at today and I'm like, well, we got all the information. It's out there. We might not like this guy's website or that guy's website, or I don't like this, but the information's available. It's there. Why don't we go back and read it and make sure? I don't know. Is it always going to be there? What are we going to do when it's taken down? Then what do we do? Then what? It's far better for us to learn now while we still can and study, go back and study, at least in conjunction with our studies, what was originally taught about whatever subject. And then, okay, this guy today, he's saying this. Does it line up with what was once taught? And does that line up with the scriptures? And does it all line up? Because I want to make sure I'm in line with God. And of course, we are commanded scripturally to be speaking the same thing. Had Uzzah and those around him been studying God's commands in the form that was available to them, Uzzah, it probably lived a ripe old age. Things would have been just fine for Uzzah. We wouldn't be reading this story about Uzzah. First Peter chapter 4, if you would. First Peter chapter 4, verse 17. For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God, and if he begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Uzzah is going to be in the second resurrection. He'll be there. But what about us? What about us? God requires exact and complete obedience to his truths, to his doctrines, and he punishes disobedience. Now, I know we think we're getting away with all this right now, but we're not. Uzzah had good intentions. Uzzah was sincere when he tried to keep the ark from falling on the ground. But he died. Because of why? Because God's instructions were not obeyed. No. Was it all Uzzah's fault? Nope. Was it all Uzzah's fault? A lot of it was King David. I'd say mainly King David's. But Uzzah had his part in it too. No, he was there. And because he was there, because of David, the leader, not following what he should have been following, that sad incident took place. Now I look around today, right? Oh, we got plenty of leaders. Same thing. We got leaders, and we think, well, they should know better. They should. We also got lots of brethren that just do whatever they want. It's pretty similar in a lot of ways. Uzzah died. David repented. Things were fixed. They did it the right way, and they did realize the importance of exactly obeying God's instructions. At the end, they did. Uzzah was an example of disobedience and touching the ark and carrying the ark and the whole thing. It was an example. He touched it. Now the oxen stumbled, and it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But I think we all have to we look at these examples, read these examples, consider these examples, and if we apply it to today, we look and we have to ask: Are your leaders teaching you to disobey God's instructions through His apostle? Now, you may not be able to answer that question if you don't know the instructions. I don't know. You got to know. Are the leaders teaching you to disobey God's government? No. We got church government, and we got top-down government. I didn't ask if you had church government and top-down government. The Catholics have top-down government, so what? There's a difference between that and God's government. And then ask yourself, if they're not, are you willing to suffer for them? Are you going to pull an Uzzah? Or are you going to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling? This account was preserved to demonstrate very clearly and very pointedly that doctrines are not casual suggestions. It reminds us that God, when it comes to His truths, His doctrines, His instructions, His way of life, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God does not change. We're not here to play church. King David repented when he saw his error. King David was not a man after God's own heart because he was sinless. King David was a man after God's own heart because of his reaction to his sins. He repented. Are your leaders repenting? Are you repenting? Am I repenting? Uzzah's good intentions, as good as they were, as sincere as they were, did not excuse the failure to obey exactly as God had instructed. So, brethren, the question becomes, what about me? And what about you? Don't pull an Uzzah.